The 2024 Worlds Final is finally upon us, and once again, T1 are in the finals. Now, certainly not a bad thing for T1 to be in the finals. They've earned their way there. The fact that this is the third time that this five-man roster is making a Worlds Finals, that's never been done before and may not ever be done again. And it's still, the unbelievably stacking amount of trophies that Faker has. It is quite incredible. I just wish that fans and some people in the media and even some analysts just didn't feel like, one, that Faker is still the best player in the world when if you watch any of the games, he is clearly not the best player in the world. And the fact that they think that this team was almost always destined to get to the World's Finals. Like they were playing really bad intentionally, and that they almost lost a game 5 to not, almost lost a game 5 against KT to not qualify to Worlds. People just seem to forget that and think that this team was always going to get here. I just wish fans were a little bit more annoying and understood that other players are really good besides Faker. There's just, I could go into this whole thing about recency bias, but that's just a bit of wasted effort. The thing is, though, is that they did earn their way into the final, and the team that they're facing pretty much makes this one of the best and most anticipated finals that I think I've ever been a part of because of both teams, really. The last two Worlds, T1 was insanely favorited in both games because both teams that had made the finals were had crazy underdog runs. It was the fourth seed from Korea and China, respectively. Obviously, however, in 2022, the fourth seed won, where the obvious happened in 2023, which T1 eventually kind of got their revenge and flattened Weibo. However, this is a very different final because not only this is probably the weakest T1 side that we've seen. Certainly they're playing pretty well into the playoffs, but how they haven't had as good a year all around. They're quite a low seed. And then the team they're playing, even though that they had a bit of a rough start to Worlds and actually got very close to going out in the group stage, BLG is certainly one of the favorites as the #1 Chinese team. And certainly with the players on both sides, I think that there is so many interesting storylines here, and there's so many different ways that this series could go. So I think we are going to ignore all the kind of whatever about, is Faker the best in the world? He's not. But, not get too frustrated about that. And let's just look at the facts of this game. Let's look at the storylines, what makes it so interesting, and why, even though it's a bit of an unexpected matchup, it really isn't. Now let's talk about the brackets and how these two teams got here. We'll start with T1 first. T1 had a pretty good Swiss bracket overall. They had to play Top Esports first, then lost their game, which is also one of the reasons why I thought that this T1 team wasn't going to beat Top Esports later on in the quarterfinals. But then they impressively beat BLG and then beat FlyQuest in a best-of-3 series to get to the quarterfinals. I had expected Top Esports to really run them out of the tournament at this point. I thought the ceiling of Top Esports in this year was much higher than T1, which I still believe to be true. However, TES has a horrible tradition, especially with TN and 369, of just deciding that quarters is far enough in Worlds and then they just do not show up. 369 has, often been the best top laner in the world and looked even, like he could be the best player in the world at times, but can't get it done on the biggest stage. And Tien is my mortal enemy, a jungler who just keeps on disappointing. So that let T1, go through relatively easily. They still played well, but the TES wasn't helping them in any way. There was actually a recent podcast that FlyQuest coach and former mid laner Nuke Duck did. He said that apparently FlyQuest was beating TES a ton in scrims, something, especially with how their world performance was, absolutely something that could have been happening, and TES was tilting a great deal. It makes sense, especially for some of the players. Cream is a very young and new guy. Tien has had some unfortunate mental health problems, and then those can sometimes pile up why he's a bit of a choker at Worlds, and nobody likes losing to an NA team. So honestly, that's a little bit funny that's kind of why they went out, but if you can't not get tilted from losing scrims and put everything onto the Rift, what else can you do? Now, quickly, we can talk about how these teams got here in the first place. T1 had to play Genji, a team who was barely not #1 in the summer split, but had looked, fantastic through the entirety of both spring and summer, and obviously winning MSI. T1, I think, was on a I don't know how many series lose streak against them, something like 10, I believe, just either in best of threes or best of fives. They have won, they had won four, or at least Chovy had won four LCK splits in a row, and this was the first one they hadn't won. It's been quite an impressive streak. I didn't think that there was any way that this team wasn't going to go through. Canyon is not a choker like some other players that he had, Chovy had in the past. Peanut, for example. Toyz was maybe starting to finally come and be more consistent as an ADC. Lehens has plenty of experience, and Keen's never been one to choke. Some of that was true. Certainly Canyon put up a great effort, especially in game 4. And Keen had some, solid games, especially that Poppy game. Lehens, I think we need to absolutely investigate Lehens, see who he's being paid by in the T1 organization, have a whole Watergate scandal around that, because he clearly didn't want to go to finals. He was clearly getting paid enough and was just like, I'm just going to stay at semifinals. Clearly quite bad. And Pays wasn't very good either. But I also think that Chovy has a little bit of responsibility on this front, because this was probably the best team he had, and they still can't get the job done. It's not like he played bad, but it's not like he rose to the occasion. I mean, that shows the real best players ever. It's like rising to the occasion and taking the game within your hands, taking the series within your hands, and being able to lead the charge and win. Even, recently, even from a couple years ago, Faker is still doing that. Faker can still have these insane plays, but Chovy, unfortunately, hasn't been able to do that. Doesn't, deter from his unbelievable consistency, and I think clearly by the end of his career, Chovy will at least have one world title and be the greatest player ever. I don't think there's any way that that won't happen. But for right now, they prove that this team wasn't the one, I suppose. It's not like they threw the series entirely. I mean, Team 1 was playing quite well. This is a meta that suited them. They were, in a meta for many months of 80 mid laners and AP junglers, something that both Honor and Faker not really used to. The Bruisers for Honor has, shown why he's been quite excellent this Worlds, and Faker obviously back on the mage is his most traditional thing, the stuff that he can make plays with, rather than doing kind of consistent damage like an ADC, which is what those mid laners were meant to do. That's absolutely what fits the team best, and I think that's absolutely the reason why they got here. Then there's BLG, who obviously had quite the rough start. They actually lost a best of 3 to T1 and were actually 1-2 at one point and almost looking to go out. They had to fight a very tough G2 team that, from a kind of elk outplay and a controversial, it's really not controversial, guys, there was a play where Hansama seemed like he was going to press E on Callista to rend and kill. I forgot who it was. I think it was Bin. Yeah, I believe it was the Rumble he was going to kill. But because he was in Zanya's, I believe that the rend had run out and he wasn't able to put it. And there was a pause for like 15 minutes trying to figure it out. So maybe people say it's divine luck to get them there. I say just maybe a bit of fortuitous luck. Either way, BLG was the one that was able to go through into the quarters. Then they disposed of the first place team, Hanwha, very easily, and they disposed of Weibo Gaming both in very quick fashion. Weibo had been a surprise before. Maybe some people thought that they were going to go back to the final, but against this BLG team, which has stronger boards, stronger members pretty much everywhere except jungle, I think it was pretty clear that the BLG team was going to go. Before we talk about who's the favorite in this matchup or what I think could potentially happen, let's look at the kind of past storylines of these two teams. We'll start with T1. Now, from a team perspective, from a 5-man lineup perspective, it's one of the most impressive things I've ever seen. 3 Worlds Finals in a row, that probably won't ever be done again. Never have I seen it where a team stays with all 5 people, is able to find a little bit of form somewhere and still continue to make these runs. The problem, though, is that people consistently say, maybe not consistently say, but people like even LS, who I respect a lot, has said, this is the best team ever. Now, in terms of Worlds performances, yeah, this is probably the best team ever. No 5-man lineup's ever going to do 3 Worlds Finals in a row ever again. I don't think so. But from the best ever, and the best ever is not just Worlds, it's, the LCK playoffs and MSI and all those other things, not just playoffs, but LCK regular season. And I don't think that this team is the best team ever. They have only won one split in their history, their very first split back in spring of 2022. They made multiple finals, but pretty much always got smashed by Gen G. They had the upper hand on them a great deal. In the early part of 2013, they were looking super good, like very good macro. And I even said that if they kept this up and went all the way to win Worlds, that they could be crowned the greatest team ever. They didn't win any splits or MSIs, and they did win the Worlds, but not at that level. And I don't think they deserve to be called the best team ever. There's a lot of other teams I think that are going to be considered better than them if you really look at the facts. Teams like even last year's JDG, yes, I know everyone's already saying it in the comments, T1 beat them in the semifinals, but that does not deter from the fact that T1 had a much worse year. Remember, that was when Poby was in for Faker, when Faker was injured, than JDG, who was on a streak of, I don't even remember. It was like 15 best of fives not lost, which is a record that won't be broken. Has set the precedent for how good a team can be. They're probably the best team fight team I've ever seen. They're the best Chinese team ever, barring, let's see what this BLG lineup can do. But then you have, I think, the golden three teams, which is you have 2014 Samsung White, who pretty much invented modern macro and vertical jungling and the sort. They deserve a whole breakdown at one point. 2015 SK team, Faker dragging his team to the finals. This was one of Faker's best years ever. People, I think, give Marin more credit than he deserves as a top laner, but Marin, Bengi, even Wolf at times were relatively weak players, and Faker, getting them to World's Finals and winning is amazing. What he did with that team, and then what I think is the best team in the history of the game, 2013 SKT, Impact, Faker, Bengi, Piglet, and Pooh Man-Do, an undefeated a Korean summer split, and still very good somewhat into 2014 summer before losing. I think all four of those teams should be considered better all time than this T1 team. But that doesn't diminish from the storyline that this could be the first ever team to win back-to-back world championships. Yes, T1 technically did it in 2015 and 2016, but they were playing with Duke instead of Marin, so it doesn't count really if you don't have the same lineup. But it's something I never thought would happen because it's the same as Dota, where the turnover rate's just very high. Dota's a bit higher in terms of the turnover rate, but it's why you've really only seen one team win TI back-to-back with the same lineup, and even that was very lucky. It could happen at Worlds. I find that very incredible. And even if it's not the best team Faker's ever played with, it's probably the most talented. I mean, all these guys have really started to show what kind of players they are. Like I said before, Honor, who was having trouble with the AP junglers, is once again getting a Worlds buff and really coming alive at this tournament. Zeus hasn't been kind of what he was at the beginning of this season and at times in 2013, where he was the best player, arguably in the world and probably the best top laner at times. I think the person he's facing is the best top laner in the world right now, but it's not like he hasn't been bad. Gumayushi, I've thought, has been always really overrated. I think people, because he's a T1 player and an ADC at that, and he had all these kind of crazy outplays at times, I think people overrate him, and he's really hasn't been that consistent. He's had a pretty good year this year, and his world performance has been quite good as well. So he's at least been stepping up on that front. And Keria, even though he's not the best player in the world right now, he's still one of the best supports ever. His engages has looked a little bit sloppy at times, but he's still pretty solid overall, and he's always going to help his team to win. And now on the other side, we have Bili Bili Gaming, BLG, and I think this team is incredibly exciting for it to finally make a Worlds Finals, because this is a team of rejects, and Knight really, but the other four, I would almost considerably say that the team was built as a reject team. So before we kind of even explain what all of that means, we got to go all the way back to 2022 to talk a little bit about BLG's history. Bili Bili is a big streaming site in China, which means an important thing: they have money. And when you have money, you make super teams. And in 2022, they made a super team. The super team consisted of, actually not 5 players, 6 players. First, top lane, you had Breathe. We all know who Breathe is at this point from RNG, from Weibo. I can't believe I'm blanking on the team he's on now. He's, been an excellent top laner. His number was kind of rising at the time. He had a very good year in 2021 with WE. They barely didn't make playoffs, but that is the first player that they picked. Then they had Weiwei, from Victory 5 when they were doing pretty well then. He was kind of the weaker one. Obviously, we saw Wei in the 2023 Worlds Finals, where he didn't really perform that well, but he was also never that amazing of a jungler anyway, just kind of an all right, consistent guy. In the mid lane, you had Fofo. Some people may not even know who he is now. Maybe some people saw him on EDG doing quite poorly recently. But in 2021, the team Rare Adam had him and he was flying. He looked like either the second or third best mid laner in all of China. It seemed like he was really going to be the next big thing. And so he was picked for the team. Then the ADC, which was the big signing. First, you had Doggo, who there was two ADCs. You had Doggo, who came from PSG Talent, who had a really good, especially a really good MSI performance in 2021, where a lot of people saw him and decided to bring him back to, or actually no, not back. He hadn't been to the LPL before, but bring him into the LPL. And then you've got Uzi, which was the big signing. Oh my God, Uzi, he is returning to League of Legends. He is going to play. And he even had an amazing support, Crisp, from obviously from FPX. And remember, this FPX team of 2021 was the team that, even though they did go to Worlds and significantly bomb out at Worlds, it wasn't Crisp's fault. And he had still been consistently looking like probably the best support or top two, top three best support in the region and sometimes the world. This team seemed like it was going to be maybe not necessarily a guaranteed success. That's kind of why they had two ADCs. Nobody knew how Uzi was going to be ready because he had obviously had his wrist injuries. He was kind of taking some time. We weren't sure how it was going to go, which is why Doggo was brought in to be still a consistent piece. And this team went plunk. They never really got off the landing. They started poor and just ended pretty mediocre. Their summer split run, well, actually, their spring split run, they barely made playoffs and then just kind of bombed out immediately. Uzi wasn't really playing much. He was, already having a kid. His wrist was still quite poor. There really wasn't much left in his career. And I, obviously, people maybe have seen how Fofo's career went. So obviously, that's kind of how that team panned out. But it is important why I stopped myself talking about the summer split, because in the summer split, they made a change. Before the summer split of 2022, BLG made a change where Breathe and Bin were swapped teams. Bin was on RNG, who had not only just won the spring split beforehand, but they had just won MSI. They really never made an explanation as to why the teams swapped, but that's kind of why I also consider Bin one of the four rejects of this team, is that he was swapped pretty much onto a losing team, hoping to make it better, just coming from an MSI team. Anytime you're kind of kicked off a team that just had won a championship, it doesn't obviously, one, make you feel good, and two, it makes you look like that the team is already trying to get rid of problematic people to be even better. But Bin didn't really help at all. They went 7-9 in the summer split and bombed right out of playoffs. And then the other four besides Bin all dispersed onto different teams. Some with still reasonable success, and some, still looking to find their way back into the top of the league, Fofo being the unfortunate exception. Then we got three people who joined. These three people are obviously Jun, the jungler, Elk, the ADC, and On, the support. Where did they all come from? Well, Jun was originally Ning's replacement back in IG. Ning, who people hopefully will remember, I mean, he wasn't that good, but, hope people will remember history. The 2018 IG Worlds winning team, he was the MVP of the Worlds final there. He was never really that good of a jungler. He wasn't as poor as Balan was on that team, but especially in 2020, he was looking really bad. And people don't remember that IG team that still had at least the Shy and Rookie. No, they still have Rookie. They did. Wait. Why am I? No, I don't know why. For some reason, my brain thought Rookie was already on TES, but no, Knight was already there. But yes, the Shy and Rookie were still on that team. This was already when Jackie Love had gone to TES. They had gotten third, but then in the summer split, but then failed to qualify for Worlds. So then they brought in Jun as Ning's replacement. And then IG just kind of was middle of the pack for a while, often not making playoffs, as obviously their two solo laners went to different teams. Never really, until really this year, was anything notable of a player. So he's absolutely just kind of somebody who was thrown aside. Then we have Elk in the bot lane. He was actually under the name of Ju Meng for a while when he played originally in that same 2021 WE team. Him and Breathe, I thought, were the two standout players in that team, and that team had like battled for top 4 and top 6 at times in the LPL and looked really good. It's just that unfortunately they kept paying Shanks to play League of Legends as their mid laner, and that guy definitely not even on fraud watch. He needs to be in jail forever at this point for the amount of games he entered for them. But then he went to Ultra Prime and 2022, and nothing happened on that team. They just didn't make playoffs because Ultra Prime's just a lower level LPL team, and he didn't really have anyone around him. So he just kind of gets thrown to the BLG team as just kind of the next step. You know, remember all these people at this point, BLG had never made any kind of international event in their 4 years of having their name on the org, and you know, not in 2021 and not in 2022, obviously. Fun fact about the 2021 team, they actually did have Zeka on the team as their mid laner, and then he went back to he went back to LCK, and we obviously know the story of what he did from there. And we have On. On is an interesting player because he came as the substitute, well, not substitute, the replacement for Sword Art in the before Weibo Gaming team, the Suning team. In 2020, we remember that Suning team made World Finals with Bin as well in the top lane. Obviously, it had you know, the Angel, Huangfang, SOFM, all who didn't really amount to much. But then Sword Art was their support, and this was kind of his last hurrah as a great player, and was able to, you know, really bring them together as a leader, and then showed a lot in their comms, and that's why they were able to make finals. But once he decided to take the giant paycheck for no reason to North America, then they brought in On as the replacement. And because the team didn't really have leadership, and the other, you know, the other players besides Bin didn't really have structure and weren't the most competent and consistent players, that team just kind of was middle of the pack, made playoffs, and never really made any noise. They would try different things with that Weibo team. They became Weibo after 2020 when the Suning brand went away. They even had the Shy obviously come in, and then the whole team was moved around with obviously Weiwei coming in, and then eventually once On left in 2022, Xiaohu would come in, and then we saw what Weibo was eventually able to do. But the guy was just kind of middle of the pack. And then at the mid lane, because before obviously Knight came, you had Yagao. Knight's, you know, really his shadow at this point, who, even though he was, you know, he had already won, you know, 2 LPL splits, 2022 and 2020 summer, both with JDG. And even though he wasn't the most dominant player, he was still a very consistent player, you know, a mid laner who could work in the team really well, always like was very good at working with his junglers, especially with Kanavi. I thought him and Yagao were an excellent duo. But they were bringing Knight in, and when you know, you're getting replaced by Knight, you're not going to have too many options. I mean, his number was not the highest. He wasn't like some amazing mid laner, especially with the talent that they have in the LPL. So he joined that team, and it was just a 5 team of rejects. And I didn't really expect this team to do much, maybe be a top 6 team. Wasn't really expecting them to fight for playoffs in any way. Well, maybe not playoffs, but maybe fight for a world spot in any way. But that necessarily wasn't the case. The team had an expected start in spring. They were 5th, and then entered playoffs and actually made quite an impressive run, getting 2nd. And then this was the first year where they allowed 2 teams from each region to go to MSI, and they were able to go. And then impressively beating T1 2 times at the MSI, netted them a 2nd place finish. You know, it's pretty unexpected for a team that, wasn't even really expected to get top four. And I think it's really impressive, and they would still go on to be even further impressive for a team of, just kind of thrown together forgotten rejects, especially when you compare that to the BLG of the year before, where it was, big announcement, here are the players. It was leaked before, oh my god, Fofo's here, Breathe is here, Uzi I, he's coming back. And then it's like, okay, they got this Elk guy, this Yagao, he has some championships. Oh, Ben's here, but that's just kind of a whatever. That was the reaction. And then for them to then do that, go on to get second place and get very close to actually winning to the 2023 summer split, and then going to Worlds, beating the #1 Korean team in Gen G, and then barely losing to Weibo to make it to the finals. All that for a team that wasn't really hyped up is quite impressive. But obviously, as good as they weren't the best team in the world and never really had a chance at being there, and they needed an upgrade. Jun and On had really, stepped up their performances, and Jun looking sometimes like to be one of the best junglers in the world, and Ben was still, debatingly being the best top laner in the world, and Elk was, showing his true strengths and not just being true strengths, and not just being a Chinese ADC. And then as good as Yagao was, his ceiling wasn't as high. So what do they do to bring in? They have to bring in Knight, of course. Now, when Knight joined this team, I think everybody agreed that this was the, without a doubt, best looking LPL team in the league. And I think, arguably this was the best looking team in the world besides Genji's super team. The fact that they added Knight, who had been consistently the best mid laner in China for really since 2019. He kind of flew under the radar then, but at least since, I guess it was a little bit debatable in 2019, but very little to no debate from 2020 onwards, aside from maybe Rookie. He has been incredibly clutch. His laning is impeccable. His team fighting is just magnificent. He probably will go down as not only the greatest Chinese mid laner ever. I mean, once he gets, kind of more longevity than Zhao Hu, he's going to easily be the best mid laner ever. But he's going to become probably the best Chinese player in the history of this game. The upside of this guy is, still insane of what he can do. I mean, he is kind of flown under the radar a little bit as well, just because, Chovy is there and people still talk about Faker as like, technically, I don't know why people talk about Faker as the greatest mid laner, but those are the names that people say the most. And because LPL is the least watched of the 4 major regions in the West, people really, I don't think, know how good Knight is. He had so many failings on the TES teams that never really worked out. The JDG team of 2023 was probably the best. I would say it's probably the best team to come out of the LPL ever. Their, high ceiling, we already talked about it. Their team fighting was insane. And Knight played well the whole time. It's just he seemed to have a kind of a history of getting iffy junglers. As good as Karsa was in his career in 2020, he doesn't always seem to understand the meta, and that kind of was the downfall of TES. Same with 369 not being great. You had Tien consistently inting for him because that's what his job is at Worlds every year, and then Kanavi really was sleeper agent in 2023 and did not want to give JEG the golden road, unfortunately. But the funny thing is that his mid lane or his jungler has been a little bit iffy at this point during Worlds, but at least it hasn't been as much of a deal breaker. This team has had quite the year. First place in both spring and summer of LPL splits, second place at MSI. Obviously, not too much to be ashamed of there. I mean, you lose to that Genji super team that we, were hoping / thought was going to make the golden road. It's not the biggest loss in the world. And then obviously at least a top 2 finish here at the World Championship. It's quite the year for them. I mean, impressive all around the boards. First and second, all 4 of the major competitions is pretty good. We could say that the result of the Riyadh, what even it was the stupid Saudi crappy event. I don't even know, the Saudi Esports World Cup thing. It shows how forgettable it was when I don't even remember the name of it, but we could say that result matters. It doesn't matter. But really all 4 of the reject players have been doing quite well this year. Bin is the best top laner in the world and has been for pretty much the entire year. I think Zeus was kind of arguably the best in the world at times, but I think throughout the entire year, I would give it to Bin as being the best. Jun, I think had a really good start to the year. He had already kind of built from his 2023 excellence, but I think in summer he kind of slipped a bit, which is actually kind of why they bring in their sixth player, who I actually neglected to talk about, and we'll get to in a second. Knight is Knight. He's still incredible. No really to say there. Elk, I think, has actually been, especially at this Worlds, quite the maybe not overperformer, but finally showing his strengths. He always had the mechanical abilities. He's been really consistent on this BLG team. He just hasn't showed up at a big event yet, and not at a world championship yet. And now he's really, giving them the clutch plays, especially when the June and their other jungler, along with the support on, haven't been great. Now, On has had a really good couple of years, but he is absolutely the kind of Hylissang player where he can be super aggressive, go in, but if he does it at the wrong times and the team is not completely synced up with what he's doing, the team will just end up losing because of what he's done. So it's absolutely hindered them for Worlds, but they've come together enough to be able to make it to the World Finals. But he's had a good enough performances to allow Elk to be as good as he was. They wouldn't be here without On having been a very good player for most of the year. And BLG does have a sixth player, and even though he's only played 3 games at Worlds, we still need to at least mention Wei. Wei was from RNG, as we know. He was there for 3.5 years, where he had quite good success, winning 2 MSIs and 2 LPL titles. I think at times he had actually looked like the best jungler in the world, especially in 2021. He had really thrived on the meta there and worked really well with Xiaohu in the top lane when he was kind of playing all different kinds of things in that top side. I think he was very successful with that kind of format. But he kind of in 2023, especially once his RNG's team had kind of split up when Xiaohu left and when Gala left, they just kind of plateaued, or he as a player just kind of plateaued with them and was just kind of mediocre for them. He was brought in to, pretty much not even really replace June, but just kind of compete with June, regardless of what their problems were, because BLG had kind of had a little bit of a rougher start in the summer placements. And he played most of the summer split, and even though he's only played 3 World games, 2 of which were losses, he still at least deserves his name to be called, because he is a member of this team, and the thing that people matter the most, which is if he wins the world championship in a couple days, he is going to get a world championship skin. But that makes up BLG's team. I mean, it's really a collection of different players, who came together mostly last year at different times to make a team of rejects being able to do well. And then they brought Knight in to, turn a team that was now very successful into a more successful team. And they have a chance to be, considered one of the greatest Chinese teams ever. And their ceiling can go even higher. Who really knows how high they can fly? So these 2 teams, very different places. I mean, I really hope the league broadcast will capture all of these storylines as they always do, and not, promote like a show that has nothing to do with the professional league scene. They're not going to do anything like that. But these storylines are pretty incredible, them matching up. Both these teams have a great chance of doing so much and improving their legacies. And honestly, I don't really know which way the series is going to go. It really depends on how much on, Ints. It's going to depend on, if they can get carry onto something that he's maybe a little bit more comfortable with. The engagers he hasn't really been working on. Guma's been pretty good, but he's also really at his best when he's not, in the backline, not getting touched. Elk is, I think, the better one in terms of the more aggressive, 1v multiple people outplays. If he's got a situation where he can do that, he's going to have a lot of confidence coming from the last couple games and couple series, as he's been quite clutch there. So that's going to absolutely be a factor there. People say Night Faker, which is, in terms of the names, it really is an ultimate matchup. I mean, you have the guy who's obviously going to be challenging probably the greatest ever. And then you have the guy who has the accolades and debatably has the highest skill ceiling / longevity in history. He's certainly probably the most clutch player in history, Faker. But I think Knight, unless Faker really comes to play and Knight doesn't, Knight's, again, arguably the MVP of the tournament. I think that he, can probably pretty easily win the lane, but it's still going to be the matchup to watch. I think the real matchup to watch is the jungle, though. Jun has had his struggling moments, but he's kind of recovered. And then Honor has probably been T1's best player. He's looked fantastic this entire time. If he really can bully Jun in that jungle, it's going to be really hard for BLG to do anything. It's going to be another game of Knight trying. I mean, and then the top lane is actually going to be even more interesting because both of these guys have insane amount of talent. Uh, Bin is probably the more consistent of the two, and not even probably Bin is the more consistent of the two, and is the best top laner in the world. But it's Zeus has the talent; he absolutely can come to play and beat them, or he can have a rematch of his 2022 performance. He hasn't been as much of a choker then, but sometimes people still have that choke gene always in them, and Bin can absolutely do what Kinjin did to him. And Kinjin and Bin are night and day, no pun intended, night and day in terms of what their skill level is. So absolutely Bin could do this to him. Either way, I think this is going to be a really exciting series. It's one of those series where regardless of the result, it's going to be meaning a lot for the future. A 3-0 on either side will be a commanding statement for the legacy of either of these teams and lots of these players. I mean, Faker's going to have 5 world titles and pretty much be almost unreachable in terms of the amount of accomplishments they had. The T1 team themselves can put themselves even further in the statement of greatness, even though I still really don't think they've ever had a peak enough or been consistently great enough to be considered a #1 team of all time. They can maybe be in the echelon of top 5, but I don't think they can ever be #1. And the BLG team, that has just started out, they absolutely have more place to go if their 5-man lineup stays, and winning worlds could just be the beginning of that. But how well do I think the series will go? Well, let me just say that if the Church of Chovy wasn't the one that was able to smite away the Demon King, that means, okay, we just have to not worry about religion there. We have to go back to our medieval times, find us a brave knight, and had him ride on his trusty elk to finally smite the Demon King away. I think this will be Knight's time to finally wear the crown. He has deserved it. Him and Chovy both deserve it, but it is clearly Knight's time to take it. BLG will win this series 3-1 and be world champion.